So in this segment, we do kind of a long, a very long video. Could cry. Look at a reaction to this Channel 4 piece about the budget, which I found quite interesting actually, in terms of not just the kind of the numbers and things like that, but also the optical argument, because you've got two different correspondents here who do argue of this, one from an economics background and one from a more political background. So I found this quite interesting to listen to.
Analyse what's happened. I'm joined from Leeds by our economics correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi, and from Westminster by our senior political correspondent, Paul McNamara, who's just come out of Rachel Reeves' press conference. Helia, I mean, a whole world of pain in the cuts, but for what? What has she done this for? Is it credibility?
I mean, it's all about being the Iron Chancellor. She's got her fiscal rules and they are non-negotiable. She wants to make sure that she absolutely sticks to those rules. Today was a fiscal patchwork. They had 9.9 billion of headroom in autumn. That disappeared, not just disappeared, but they went 4 billion into deficit. And today she outlined that she would take the political pain in order to make sure that she stays on course. But don't forget, Krish, that this is a tiny, tiny bit of headroom for a huge amount of different risk, and I think that's worth remembering. So, yes, the market...
we've already lost that headroom in the space of, about 6 months? And again, that's not even taking into account the Trump tariffs. So again, she's not left herself a lot of space here. She's also boxed herself in terms of the policies. There wasn't a lot to cut in terms of, welfare and things like that as is. So, in the next few weeks, if they don't placate Trump enough, they're going to run into problems, especially if they have to do things like the digital services tax cut. That's £1 billion gone right there.
Markets are calm. There was a bit of a spike in the gilt market, but they seem to have calmed down. But there is a lot of pain still to come.
And the reports that go along this from the Office of Budget Responsibility say that it could all be wiped out very quickly and very easily if Donald Trump sparks his trade war, if the global tariffs kick in. We'll analyse all of that in a moment. But Paul, I mean, the pain which is being felt in welfare cuts is, I'm guessing, reflected in the pain at Westminster amongst Labour MPs.
Yeah, I think you can always gauge just how miserable people are by how quickly they respond to your text messages or how quickly your inbox is filling up. They're responding very quickly today. There are a lot of messages. When these welfare cuts get to a vote in front of the House, this is not going to be a nice experience for the government. Now, look, truth is, they got a whopping great big majority. They don't really need to worry about that. But red on red.
But again, they do have a big majority, but even under the Tories, you do see rebellions, and it does cause problems. There is a question for these Labour MPs of how much credibility are they going to have in 4 years.
Attacks are not going to be a great look for the next couple of months, and that's what you can expect.
I'm guessing a lot of them are wondering if this is what they came into politics for.
Oh, my goodness. Look, so firstly, you get lots of text messages from people, backbenchers saying, this is what I think, don't use it on the record. But actually now we're just getting statements that are coming out posted to Twitter. So this one, Kim Johnson, the first, she's an MP from Liverpool. The very first line, austerity 2.0 is here. That is very definitely not the line that Number 11 wants to be selling. And then this line here really caught me. This assault on disabled people and those in need of support is nothing short of sadistically cruel. That's one of their own MPs.
This is the language they would keep for the Conservative Party. This is their own party, their own Chancellor. They are accusing of these things.
So to the question of whether this is austerity or not, I mean, how does this compare to where we were in the Cameron Osborne years of austerity? And can we say it is or it isn't?
Well, I think you have to separate all the protected departments from the unprotected departments. And overall, I think it's not the same as 2008. What we're talking about is cutting about £3 to £4 billion from department spending. That's, far cry from what happened in the Osborne years in 2010. But it's less generous than we thought back in autumn. And today the government said, look, we're only cutting spending, from 1.3% for the overall envelope down to 1.2%. Don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. And of course, if you're in defence, if you're in the NHS, sure, you might not worry. But if you are in the court system, if you are the Home Office, where you have had sustained kind of cutbacks and sustained problems with your funding packages over a decade and a half, really, quickly, then I think anything less than the generosity that was promised, where they thought they're going to give this big fiscal boost, there's, basically lots of cash in the first 2 years. Inflation has eaten into a bit of that. And now it's going to be even less generous than they thought. So in real terms, those unprotected departments, the IFS says, face cuts of about, real terms, only rises of 0.8%. So that's a real term cut.
So it's not austerity as we knew it. But I mean, the government has been sticking to this line since well before the election. I've grilled.
Again, it depends on how you define austerity. I've gone over the Google definition of austerity before, which is an economic policy. Austerity is a set of political economic policies that aim to reduce budget deficits through spending cuts, tax increases, or a combination of both. The other definition they have is difficult economic conditions created by government measures to reduce public expenditure, which again, that is what we are seeing here. So it depends on your definition. Are you talking about overall government departmental spending, or what? How do you define it?
Told Rachel Reeves and Keir Starmer about this so many times, and the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones, that they keep saying, overall spending is up and it continues to rise. Yeah. But that's because there are some departments getting more than others, and in some departments it's going to feel very much like a cut.
If we threw all the money at the Defence Department, for example, took, say 2% or 1% out of each department, and then threw all of that money into defence plus a little bit, is that not austerity then?
Look, their whole shtick is, we came into government and what we announced was a funding package that was so much more generous than what the Tories had in mind. And that is true. They increased spending, in the last year by £50 billion. So it is more generous. What's happening now is that they are winding some of that down. Now, people like the Resolution Foundation say, hang on a moment, you said you wanted to rebuild public services. You say that you want to get people back into work. And you've done all of these cuts really just to make the maths work, just to fall back into your fiscal headroom. And
that's something the IFS have accused her of, well, that the decision she's making, because she's trying to match the amount of spending she did back in announced in October, has led to irrational thinking. That's what the IFS has accused her of, and was getting in the way of rational policy making.
And there's lots of suspicion that she had fiscal headroom of, £9.9 billion back in autumn, and all of the policy measures equal, give her that exact same number again. So, to Paul's point that, all of these welfare cuts have political ramifications, not to mention the real world ramifications. The complaint is it's being rushed through, and it's being rushed through only to meet the Treasury's kind of wonk desire to make the numbers work.
Yeah, I mean, Paul,
again, the fiscal rules being the problem.
The argument is going to be that they say that this is all about getting people back into work, and that this is a philosophical change that they had been working on for months before the election. But my goodness, isn't this an astonishing coincidence that the numbers end up the same in terms of sort of the headroom, the money that they've got to play with at the end? And that leaves a big question mark over whether this is really driven by the numbers or some deep-seated idea or philosophy around getting people back into work.
It's something I've discussed kind of in a separate video, which is the exact point the guy running the IFS says. Like, it can't be, like an ideological change because you would have done this off the bat. This is a numbers game.
Look, I think Rachel Reeves announced her stringent fiscal rules ages ago. Come hell or high water, she is not moving away from them. Of course, they want to get people back to work. By the way, they were given a little bit of cover actually on that whole thing of austerity 2.0. Paul Johnson, the old boss of the IFS, turned around yesterday and put out this graph.
Not old boss yet, Paul.
Oh, not old boss yet. So God, I've already got him out the door. My sincerest apologies, both Helia and Paul Johnson. But he puts out this graph saying, look, it's nothing like austerity. That gave Labour a good bit of cover. Darren Jones, First Secretary of the Treasury, when he was in Downing Street yesterday, bringing in all the members of government saying, look, this is what we've got planned. First of all, he didn't mention the extra £500 million worth of cuts to welfare that came overnight. So quite a few people in the government payroll are annoyed about that. But he was making the point, it's not austerity 2.0. The truth is, though, you can bang on about that all you want. But if local MPs are getting people turning up to their surgery saying, wait a second, you've cut all of my benefits.
So you see what I'm saying there? The economic argument and the political argument, that's what makes this video quite interesting.
I am now significantly worse off, and there will be vast amounts of people who are significantly worse off. It doesn't matter the messaging, it's what people really feel.
Yeah, and what we got since the statement in the House of Commons, Paul, is the DWP impact assessment, which has some very stark numbers. I mean, you look at that and you wonder how they managed to go ahead with a policy that results in 250,000 more people being pushed into relative poverty, 50,000 of which will be children. So that is an increase in child poverty as a result.
Yeah, vote for Labour, child poverty to go up. Let's go.
Of Labour policies. Now, Rachel Reeves was just asked about this in a press conference. Has she got an answer?
Yeah, look, I'll do the bit of balance here. I'll play the role of Labour. Their line, and you can expect to hear this being trotted out time and time again over the next couple of months. Those figures, Labour turn around and say, actually, look, but what we did do is we said that we put in £1 billion of support to get people into work, and none of these assessments.
But by the way,
take into
Paul,
consideration
that £1 billion that they're basically adding £1 billion for coaches, they got a bit of a rap on the knuckles from the OBR this afternoon, because the OBR, who obviously Labour have lauded much to their chagrin because they now keep being told off by the OBR, but they were saying there's no evidence, there's no detail of all of these coaches. So yeah, they've said they're
It's probably a bung to the private sector, let's be honest.
Going to add these £1 billion to bring coaches into job centres, to bring people back into employment. But actually, there doesn't yet seem to be much detail about it.
I love this. It's all in the messaging, Helia. The OBR say that, and then Labour use it in turn and say, oh, no, actually, but OBR haven't been able to assess the impact of that £1 billion. So really, people are probably going to be fine. But actually, on the stuff that we do have, the things that we do have numbers for, the things that they have been able to run assessments for, we've got 250,000 people, additional people in relative poverty, including 50,000 kids. 3.2 million people will be worse off. Those are tough numbers to swallow.
So their message is, of those 250,000 people, some may end up not being in relative poverty because they might go back to work. But this is all
exactly
amorphous.
And, ITV have done analysis about it as well. Like, these changes that they're making will not push that many people back into work. It won't work effectively. You're talking, I think it was tens of thousands of people at best.
Unworked out and a bit of a guess. And they are quite clearly not saying that we'll wipe it out. They are admitting that there will be people, no matter how many we end up with, being pushed more into poverty.
But
exactly, there is an ambiguity.
There is an economic problem that is going on that underpins this. I mean, forget about Rachel Reeves trying to make sure that she meets her kind of fiscal rules. We have a problem with inactivity in this country. It was something that economies around the world faced, but have seemed to recover from after COVID. We haven't in this country, and the numbers are quite stark. You've got 2.8 million people who are long-term sick. That's a third of all people who are inactive. And without people re-entering the labour market, all of our issues around growth, around productivity are not really going to be fixed. And in terms of the costs, if I just talk to you about that, back in 2010, it cost £28 billion. Before COVID, it cost £37 billion. Currently, for that health segment of universal credit, we're paying almost £50 billion. So you can see that there is a problem that needs to be solved. I think everyone is on board with that. Everyone accepts that we need reform in the welfare market. I mean, it's simply not sustainable long term, because if the new claimant count continues at the same pace, then it's going to
there's no guarantee of that happening, though, is there? Like, if Labour can actually fix the NHS, or at least get things moving on that front, there's no guarantee it will continue to see exponential growth.
All of our departmental spending and all of our budget will be eaten up by it. But it's how the government want to go ahead and get across. And if you talk to people from, Resolution Foundation, for example, they say, this is all being rushed through. Look at the personal independence payments. That's not even work dependent. And you've got a whole lot of cuts that just mean that people will not qualify. I think 800,000 people will now not qualify for those PIP payments. That's not anything to do with getting people back into the labour market.
And it is that rush, I think, that has got a political impact that they haven't perhaps foreseen. Because what you would normally do, I think, around quite a big reform such as this, and because after all, what they've sort of done through the back door is reintroduce this idea of deserving and undeserving, welfare recipients. They are basically suggesting there are a load of people who are getting these welfare payments who shouldn't be getting them. Now they're dressing that up as saying we don't want to write people off. We don't want to sort of push people onto a scrap heap under which they will never work. But the sort of the coded message is they don't really deserve these payments, and that's why we're stopping them. To get the public to a place where they will agree with that normally would take quite a long time, and they haven't really done that job.
So, you set the stage. I think they're relying on the stage, really, the Conservative Party set, because the Conservative Party have constantly gone after the welfare system, despite the fact that they have constantly kind of tinkered and reformed it. So there is that
job of work politically, have they, Paul?
So much of this has been rushed through, even in the last 48 hours, to try and get. So for those who don't know, so last week a whole load of welfare reforms were announced that was meant to save 5 billion quid. Turns out they're not going to save 5 billion quid. They might save about 2.9 billion. Well, now all of a sudden the Treasury had to find an extra 2 billion pound. So overnight we get 500 million more in cuts to the welfare bill. That's happened at light speed. Not even the welfare cuts the DWP's been working to for ages. The 500 million we've seen just overnight. Then there were more cuts that were had to be found. So all the legwork that you would need to do, bringing people on a journey with you, bringing your backbenchers on a journey with you, they haven't been able to do whatsoever.
They haven't even managed to bring the DWP, the department in charge of this, around with them either, because of the fact that they were so desperate to kind of match the spending that they announced back in October.
Helia, let's talk a little bit about why we're in this mess. I mean, growth cut from 2% to 1%. The Chancellor talking about the world is changing, but not spelling it out why. Nobody's actually nailing Donald Trump for any of the changes that he's forced on Britain, which is increased defence spending. That's a whole load of money away from the poorest people in the world in the development budget into defence, and the start of a global trade war, which could get worse. So why are we in this mess for a start this year? And what does the ongoing uncertainty around Trump mean for the next few months and next year?
Well, first of all, to why are we in this mess? Why did her headroom disappear? Why did it vanish? Well, it disappeared because borrowing costs went up. And that is to a large degree outside of the Chancellor's, outside of the government's control, driven by what happened with the US. But also now, latterly, because of the bond market's understanding that Europe will need to spend so much more on defence. Now, today, the Chancellor was presenting defence as a kind of platform for industrial renaissance. But
again, we've kind of discussed this, depending on when timing comes out, the UK's energy bill costs are so high, so high that it wouldn't, it's not viable compared to other countries without massive subsidies. We've discussed the situation in Jaguar Land Rover under the Tories where they had to offer them a massive subsidy so they wouldn't set up shop, increase kind of further manufacturing in Spain over the UK.
when the bond market looks at it, they think, hang on a moment, you are going to need to borrow a hell of a lot more money, Europe. And therefore, it adds to the cost of borrowing for European countries, including the UK. But a lot of that is driven by the US. I think to your opening remarks, Krish, this is all on a coin toss. That's what the OBR said.
Crazy.
This whole forecast is about 54% chance of actually surviving contact with oxygen. I mean, that is extraordinary. You've got this, as I was saying, this tiny incy-wincy bit of headroom. It's really wafer thin, and you've got huge amounts of uncertainty. And that huge amount of uncertainty is because of trade. And that could all come to a head next week. I mean, literally 1 week from now, all of this might be completely irrelevant if we have...
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, we've got a little bit longer than that, so we're still waiting to see on the Trump tariffs.
Tariffs day, if Donald Trump upends the global economy, if the UK doesn't necessarily get this deal that we think we're going to get by giving, tax relief to the likes of Meta and Google, then it's going to spell real problems for the UK economy and the global economy. And the OBR is saying there's a huge chance that will happen. But it's not just that, it's also productivity. We have an issue. It's a kind of nerdy thing to talk about, but basically economists have struggled difficult to describe why the UK is no longer as productive.
I can give you some examples of things that I might think of. Middle management in this country is shocking because they don't pay middle managers, I think, enough in some businesses, whilst others, they have too much power to kind of micromanage. They do promote people who are glazers rather than people who actually work hard. In terms of equipment, some of the software we use in this country is ancient. Talking about stuff from the 2000s, that doesn't help. So the NHS being completely shot as well. Like, other countries have working healthcare systems, developed countries. So that's a big problem, I think, as well. So it's not just it's not really down to people being idle. It's just, I think a lot of it stems from really outdated software and systems. The kind of demand of people to go back in the office where they're going to be less productive, combined with the ancientness of our systems, as well as really bad middle management in some places.
The OBR has been way more optimistic than other economists, and now they're saying, look, if productivity doesn't recover, if we don't get back, not just to, we're not talking about the, halcyon days of the last Labour government into 2007. I'm talking about just the 2010s. If we don't get back to that, then we have another real problem. And so in a way, yes, she's managed to get through today. She's the Chancellor's great at fighting. She's great at saying, I am absolutely determined.
Seems like that's all she really does is really create massive stinky headlines and be like, no, I'm determined to get through this.
Made all the right decisions, and she believes that's what she says. She says everything that happened in autumn, despite what all these businesses say about Nix, everything I did was right. But actually, a lot of the hard work is only going to start now.
Yes, and we're going to spend the next 6 months speculating about which taxes she's going
which, again, this is, more stuff the IFS have said.
to have to raise in the autumn, or which spending cuts are going to have to be made as well. And that, again, Paul, seems to be a quite striking failure of today, that it hasn't stopped or scotched anything. It has actually, if anything, fired the starting gun on the next round of debates. And that's not the press being troublemaking. That's just looking at the economic reality.
Oh yeah, like look, I was sat there in the chamber where she was going through everything, and you talk about the numbers. Helia bringing up their excellent Monty Python reference with the wafer thin headroom. There is no way that we're not going to be spending the next 6 months talking about what she's going to have to do when it comes to an actual budget. And in fact, there was a briefing afterwards with Rachel Reeves' officials where we're all going through this quite hearty document and like picking out all the things that the OBR that basically picks apart her numbers and goes, okay, well, if there's trade war with Donald Trump, your surplus is gone. Okay, well, productivity falls, everything goes. And like just sort of nailing down everything, because it's very, very unlikely that we're going to get to her actual budget and all of this is going to be intact. So you're sitting there listening to all of this thinking, my goodness, there is going to have to be something that happens between now and then. And the line that I keep hearing from Labour MPs, and this isn't just from the ones on the left that are kicking off about everything that Number 10 does. It's a lot of these essentials ones. They're saying at the moment, my God, if we're already having to cut the welfare budget by this much and this quickly, what on earth are we going to have to do when it turns out we've got no money in 6 months' time? Well,
that's what I mean. Like, that's why they should have, if they were smart, they had time to prep, talking about tax increases on the rich, but then again, they would make the argument that it gives them more time to kind of funnel away their money, things like that. And we saw kind of how slow the state was in dealing with Russian oligarchs and their money. But reducing the welfare bill, this was not the answer. Like the main thing is she needs to get rid of the fiscal rules. She needs to get rid or change the fiscal rules so that it enables her to do more borrowing if needed, because ultimately this system they've set up is not working. There's not much more to cut from welfare. So what are you going to do next time? Because there will be a next time. Everyone knows this. She's going to come back in the autumn and ask for more money. It's going to happen. Everyone's preparing for this reality.
The economic growth isn't delivered. What on earth is she going to have to cut then?
Yes, and the other thing that came up in the press conference was the whole question of this digital services tax and whether there is some secret deal being done to offer tax relief to the tech bros in return for a deal on tariffs. Now, again, I mean, is the government really going to go to the country and say, while delivering these welfare cuts, it's going to give a tax cut to the handful of richest people in the world? It's only a handful of people who actually pay this tax.
the verbal gymnastics that go on whenever you get one of those
Crazy.
press conferences, because no one wants to call out Donald Trump. No one wants to pin their thing on him. When Rachel Reeves was asked a specific question about Donald Trump, the answer go back, and fair play to her researchers. They've done their work. They got a whole load of stats. Here you go. Just say this. She was able to provide, look, under the last Trump presidency, he loves us. Actually, the amount of trade that we did went up, and they find every argument they can. You can carry on doing that all you want.
I think things have changed now. I think, last time he threatened a trade war with Mexico and Canada, he got the USMCA trade deal. The only ones he really had a trade war with was China. And I think things are different now because he started that trade war, I believe, with Canada. I think that's actually happened.
But in a week's time, Donald Trump's talking about Liberation Day. If that comes, then all bets are off. And yes, you're right. On that tax for tech bros, my goodness, that will go down badly.
Yeah, there's a risk, Krish, that we're just allowing the US to pick our pockets here. We're bending.
Run me them pockets, because she's right. That is what's happened here. We've become bigger cucks to America than we ever have been by offering this tax cut to a bunch of rich tech oligarchs, really.
Backwards to make it happen. I just wanted to go back to growth, because I do think that is a big deal, because this year, don't forget, one of the big pieces that came out from today is that, when Labour came into power, they said growth is their number one mission. In fact, they said we're going to grow faster than any other G7 country. That quickly became completely
They've sort of ditched that,
untenable.
haven't they? We're not really quite
Apparently, they're more aiming for living standards, but living standards aren't really going up either.
clear whether they still
exactly.
contend that to be the case or not.
Yeah, they just ditched that, but they replaced that with living standards. They said, okay, well, we're not going to grow faster than everyone else. Fair enough, fair cop, but we will improve living standards. And there was a lot made, I think, today by Rachel Reeves that living standards are going to go up by the end of this Parliament. She made a big deal of the fact that households at the end of Parliament would be £500 better off. And let's have a listen in on how that sounded.
This isn't just about lines on a graph. It's about improving people's lives. Real household disposable income will now grow this year at almost twice the rate expected in the autumn. The OBR say today that people will be, on average, over £500 a year better off under this Labour government.
So amazing. Lots of cheers, lots of applause, and it's all because of Labour. Except, is it really? Because when you look at the numbers, a lot of that is driven by the simple arithmetic of pay going up faster than inflation. And most of that actually happened, not now, not in the future under this Labour government, but last year. So that big uptick in incomes happened. Well, it's already happened. It's gone.
It's
It's
very
over.
unclear whether she's...
And we've just hit the end of the financial year. People's council tax is going up by a lot. People's bills are going up by a lot. So again, this argument of people are £500 better off, are they really then?
spoken there as well, isn't it? Because she said £500 a year better off. And it's not clear whether she means £500 every year or £500 by the end of this Parliament.
By the end of the Parliament. I think by the end of this Parliament. And you get this...
God damn, £500 by the end of the Parliament is abysmal. Absolutely abysmal.
And there is an improvement, but the point I wanted to make was that a lot of that improvement is because it's from a much higher start. The OBR's forecast today says that actually incomes last year were much higher than they had accounted for, even in October 2024. So a lot of the heavy lifting has been done already. And the problem you face then is that going forwards, our income's going to be rising at a kind of rate of not. Well, I'm afraid no, they're not, Krish.
And if it's £500 over 200 weeks, I don't think many people are going to be very impressed by that.
I don't think people are going to notice that, to be honest.
And also, Elliot, how many times in your reporting career have you listened to a chancellor or a prime minister say, you're going to be X amount £100 better off in a few years' time?
Just one other thing to mention, though, which is very awkward, I think, for the government today, which is that the OBR have made clear that the rise in national insurance at the last budget was, in fact, a tax on working people.
That's something she was accused of by Emily Mattis as well, and she kind of admitted it at the time.
I
think that's Absolutely right. I mean, this is one of the things that there's a slight mismatch between how the government describe their interaction. Whenever you talk to businesses, from all the surveys, from the kind of sentiment amongst the business community, they complain about that £40 billion tax hike that we had last October, most of that driven by the increase in employer NICs. Now, Rachel Reeves says, I was absolutely right to do that. There's no problem with that. That gave us the position to continue to grow from. But the OBR, again, as you said, Krish, said today that 76% of the cost of that would be passed on to employees through lower incomes. So going back to that household income thing, where are we going to be richer? Well, going forward, companies are going to feel squeezed because from next week, these NI increases come into effect. And who's going to pay for that? Well, you and me, the employees of the country.
Right. Let's just finally talk about Rachel Reeves. There are still whispers, aren't there, around whether she's going to stay the course. Paul, do you think people in the Labour Party are considering whether she should be swapped out?
Look, I think name any chancellor, and I've heard rumours that they're going to be swapped out. That's kind of an eternal thing that happened.
I don't know about this. I think Philip Hammond was quite secure when he had Theresa May. I think Gordon Brown was the big one because he had a lot of problems with Tony Blair. There was a lot of tension, but I think Hammond was relatively safe. I think Osborne was relatively safe. You had Javid, who wasn't because of the bald geezer, the bald geezer, Cummings. And I think Sunak wasn't safe, actually. They briefed against him. And they also leaked the fact that he has a US green card. So, all right, fair cop. I'll give you that.
Around here, I think the bigger worry that they've got is a mass rebellion when it comes to a vote on the welfare cuts. But look, if it gets to... if you make a rule which you say, I'm going to live and die by these fiscal rules, and I'm going to pay for everything by growth. If we get to 6 months from now and there isn't growth and you've still got these fiscal rules, so you're either going to have to raise taxes massively, or you're going to have to slash spending massively, or a mixture of the both massively, then yeah, there are going to be people who are going to be paying for your head.
And rightfully so, because again, you've already made the point over the last year, so long now, this rule is dumb. This rule is going to cause them problems. I told you guys that a year ago. I don't have an economics background, but I could see that coming down the tracks because they don't have the UK's debt to GDP is already very, very high. So the idea that you're going to drop it is crazy to me. So we knew this was going to happen. You have to borrow to invest. You don't have really 5-year plans. You'd have to do it over 10, potentially 10 to 15 years. That's the only way you could do it.
Do the financiers and City people, Helia, talk about this? I mean, do they think
fuck those guys.
she's the one for the full term, or do they want Pat McFadden or somebody else?
No, I think, department politicians, Secretary of States will always be against Treasury because Treasury is the one that holds the purse strings. So I don't think chancellors necessarily have a popular ride. I mean, particularly Rachel Reeves, but I think she likes fighting. And I think despite the fact that businesses are very upset because they feel like she let them down when it came to the tax rises last year, there is a lot of hope when you talk to people within the market and when you talk to companies about their investment plans. Don't forget, I mean, to give them the credit, they were talking about raising, they've just had a bill of reforms for house building, and you see that the OBR has actually scored that today. So the government has said we're going to build 1.5 million homes. Most builders say
I don't think that's possible. The industry said it's impossible, but yeah.
That's not possible, but the OBR today say, well, actually, we think, yeah, you might just under that, 1.3, but that's a lot of improvement from the last government. And so
the last government didn't do it because they were in the pockets of the developers, the landowners, and also homeowners who didn't want more houses near them because it would lower their house value.
There's a lot of hope, I think, from companies that the kind of reforms to planning, the kind of changes to infrastructure will start to materialise, the kind of changes to the National Wealth Fund, all of these pieces of reform will add up to something. But of course, that's all dependent on, don't come back in autumn and ask for more tax.
So she's safe for now, Paul, you reckon?
She's safe for now, but 6 months from now, that's when
If they have to break their manifesto.
Yeah, and it's not just going to be MPs that are going to talk about it. Headline writers are going to be full of it. If you get to 6 months from now and a certain section of the press thinks that she's doing an even worse job than they already feel that she's doing, because a certain section of the press are always going to be anti-Labour government, but those headlines are going to ratchet up and ratchet up and ratchet up. And
I think if we keep seeing the stagnant growth that we're seeing now, I think that's where you're going to see the problem.
it's when the gossip on the WhatsApp group starts ratcheting up, and inevitably starts to leak. And that's when you know things are in real trouble. We started getting leaks out of Cabinet. Well, 6 months ago, we definitely weren't getting that. They were rigid as hell. Now we started getting the odd leak from what's happening.
You had Shabana Mahmood talking about there's no point talking to the press because that's going to get leaked. And then that statement of hers got leaked. So
the WhatsApp groups, again, 6 months ago, that wasn't happening.
That's because we've got a spending review coming up. I think some of that is just the normal, clash
lobbying.
of. Yeah, exactly. And I mean,
I think a bit of it is that, but these are the guys that have been fighting for years to turn everything around, turn the perception of them around. And talking to the special advisor to a cabinet member, one of the things they said to me 2 weeks ago was, first of all, when we were talking about the relationship, this is the special advisor from an unprotected department. They were talking about the relationship with the Treasury. They were saying that Rachel's never been stronger. They're feeling really weak. And the line that got me was, I thought the bonds of friendship would have extended further into government than this. So it wasn't just about...
Yeah, they thought it was their friends thing. Yeah, how embarrassing. The politicians are always going to do what's best for them. Imagine being a politician and not realising this, or being a special advisor and not realising this. She's going to look out for herself because she probably has prime ministerial ambitions. So she's going to say, F your department. If it helps me win power, who cares? And the Treasury's always been the most finicky department to deal with because, like the economics correspondent pointed out earlier, they hold the purse strings. They control so much, and they hold effectively a lot of the other cabinet members' careers in their hands as well.
That spending review, you can really start feeling the fractures between some of the people that have been fighting for this for years together.
We better leave it there. This is great. We should have correspondents arguing on Channel 4 News more. It's like a sort of a peek into our morning meeting.
This has been really fun. Like, I didn't have a ton to add to this because you've got a really good kind of economics correspondent as well as a really good political correspondent. So there's not a ton for me to add here. And if anything, I probably made it worse. But I think you had when you look at the spring statement, you've got really the political angle covered here really well and the economics angle covered here really well. This would be a really good podcast setup, to be honest with you. I think Channel 4 have some good people here, so hopefully that continues. And if I see more of these kind of long form clips, because this is more like a podcast than anything, I would happily cover this stuff and watch this stuff because I've really enjoyed it. So let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Sorry guys, I didn't have a lot to add to this. It's really good. It's really good content. This is definitely A-tier content as far as politics nerd stuff goes. Support the channel on Patreon if you can. I guess big up Channel 4, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye bye.